They didn't ask for my name. They didn't ask why I was there. They just pointed at the envelope in my hand. 2 armed guards led me to a side room. No windows. No explanations. They didn't shout. They didn't hit me. But they kept me there 2 hours. Every item on me was inspected. My shoes, my belt, even the lining inside my briefcase. When they opened the envelope, they didn't read it. They just looked at it, as if it were contaminated. Then one of them slipped it into a red file, locked it in a safe, and said nothing. "Wait here," the officer said. But after 2 hours of silence, I was suddenly told I was free to go. No accusations, no warning, no thank you. I stepped out of that compound, drenched in sweat, even though the sky was freezing. For the first time in 10 years of service, I began to question the only rule I had ever followed. Don't ask about the letters. That envelope, blank, nameless, sealed, was supposed to be just another delivery. But the moment I touched it, something shifted. Not outside, inside me. I had no idea what I was carrying. But I would soon learn that I was not delivering a message. I was delivering a sentence. My name was never meant to be remembered. Not by history. Not even by those I worked with. In North Korea, the less you are seen, the longer you survive. I worked as an internal courier for the Ministry of State Security. But no one called it that aloud. We were simply handlers. Men who carried sealed documents between departments, without asking questions, without reading names. Just hands in motion, voices silent. I wore a gray uniform with no insignia, no rank. My ID badge had no name, only a number. That anonymity was supposed to protect us. But it also made us disposable. My daily route ran between 3 key locations in Pyongyang. The Central Communications Bureau, the administrative branch of the Organization and Guidance Department, and occasionally, a sealed drop point behind a building known only to insiders as the Tower. I never saw who picked up the envelopes. I just left them in a locked box and walked away. Eyes forward. No hesitation. I lived alone in a small concrete unit inside the Donghung residential block, a mid-tier housing complex reserved for mid-level state functionaries. The lights worked. The water ran most days. I had a radio that only tuned to the state channel, and a neighbor I never spoke to, who also left at 6 a.m. and returned after dark. We never acknowledged each other. That was safer. I had no wife, no family. My parents died in a chemical fire when I was in my teens, and I was raised by a state school for war orphans. The ministry took notice of my discipline, my silence, and my ability to follow orders without hesitation. By 27, I was recruited into the Internal Delivery Corps, a position that required absolute discretion. There was a man before me. His name was Choi. He'd worked the same route for 8 years. Then one day, he stopped showing up. No farewell. No transfer. His file was quietly archived. When I asked the logistics officer about him, the reply was simple. There was no Choi. Focus on your route. At the time, I didn't question it. People disappeared in Pyongyang all the time. Some got reassigned. Others went away for training. You learn quickly not to ask. Curiosity is not a virtue here. It's a sentence. So I kept my head down. I memorized every alley, checkpoint, and back door. I never looked inside a single envelope. Never questioned a signature. Never missed a step. That is, until the day I was handed the letter with no name. Routine was everything. In North Korea, routine means survival. I woke up each day at precisely 5:45 a.m. Not because anyone ordered me to, but because I had trained myself to beat the morning siren by 15 minutes. I prepared tea-powdered green leaves, smuggled from a friend in the countryside, and ate a bowl of lukewarm cornmeal. At 6:10 a.m., I stepped outside. Same gray coat, same scuffed shoes, same expressionless face. The guards at the checkpoint knew me, but never acknowledged me. That was a rule. No nods, no eye contact. Just clearance stamps and silence. I liked it that way. The walk from my building to the first ministry office took 17 minutes. I timed it to avoid the morning lectures broadcast from the public speakers. Some days, the streets were quieter than others. On those mornings, I would hear things I wasn't meant to: the whimpering of someone behind a closed gate, or the low cough of an elderly man no one would help. But I kept walking. I had a job to do. The job itself was mechanical. Pick up a sealed document. Verify it had not been tampered with. Log the timestamp. Deliver it without deviation. Return. Repeat. I didn't ask who wrote the letters, or who received them. I didn't wonder what was inside. That was the unspoken oath of couriers. You carry the weight, not the knowledge. And yet, there were moments, small ones, that didn't feel right. Once, I delivered a package to a rear entrance of a research facility. A man in a military uniform took the envelope from me and, without a word, lit it on fire in a metal bin. I waited for him to sign the logbook, but he waved me away. His hand trembled slightly. I said nothing. Another time, I was instructed to change my route mid-delivery. A sealed envelope was removed from my case by a man I'd never seen before. He asked me one question. "You didn't open it, did you?" I shook my head. He nodded once, then disappeared into a black car. No plates. No explanation. Back at headquarters, no one mentioned the incident. The logbook skipped that entry. Sometimes I wondered what would happen if I forgot one step, missed one scan, said one wrong word. But mostly, I didn't think at all. I drank my tea. I kept my mouth shut. And I delivered letters no one dared open. That was my life. Until the day the envelope arrived with no name, no address, and no return path, only a single line. Deliver directly. Do not open. The envelope was unlike any I had ever seen. It was matte black. No seal. No markings. No barcode. No sender. No recipient. Just one line written in block letters across the center. Deliver directly. Do not open. Even the weight felt different. Heavier, though the paper was thin. My supervisor didn't speak as he handed it to me. He simply looked at me too long. I bowed slightly and left. The instructions were clear. Hand deliver to Compound 12C, outer perimeter of the Ministry of Defense. I'd never been assigned there before. In fact, no courier I knew had. It was said to be a decommissioned weapons research center. Rumors circled about chemical experiments and personnel who went in but never came out. I had assumed most of that was nonsense. But now, I wasn't so sure. When I arrived, the outer gate was already open. Two soldiers stood stiffly, their rifles angled downward but ready. One of them held out a gloved hand. "Give me the envelope," he said flatly. "I was told to deliver it directly," I replied. The soldier didn't move. He looked behind him, then spoke into a radio. Moments later, I was escorted inside, not to an office, but to a small windowless chamber with a steel table and a single chair. "Sit," the other soldier ordered. I obeyed. Then silence. Minutes passed. I wasn't questioned. I wasn't searched. Just watched. 2 hours later, a woman in civilian clothing entered. She wore no insignia, but her presence made the room colder. She took the envelope from the table, opened it in front of me, and looked inside. No emotion crossed her face. She nodded to the guard. He returned the envelope to the table, now resealed. "You are dismissed," she said. Her voice was low, toneless. I left without further instruction. No logbook signature. No confirmation. Outside, the same guards avoided my eyes. Something was wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment she opened the envelope. The way her eyes flicked downward just for a second before returning to their blank stare. As if she'd seen something that didn't surprise her, but still disturbed her. 3 days later, I noticed a man watching my apartment building from across the street. He wore civilian clothes, but stood too still. I passed him twice on my walk. He never moved. The next week, I asked about the recipient at 12C. No one had heard of them. Officially, the building didn't exist. Then the call came. A colleague, one I had shared lunch breaks with for months, was arrested. No charges, no explanation. Just vanished. His desk was cleared the next day. I visited the logistics room that evening. Choi's name, my predecessor, was gone from the Courier registry. Not marked as retired, just erased. And now, mine was missing too. I stood there, frozen, staring at the blank space where my file should have been, as if I had never existed. That's when I understood. The envelope hadn't just been a message. It had been a test, and I had failed it. I didn't pack a bag. I knew better. A packed bag was a confession. Instead, I carried nothing but my identification papers, a small roll of bills hidden inside my sock, and a strip of dried barley in my coat pocket. The envelope, the one that had started all of this, was tucked inside the lining of my jacket. I had resealed it after that woman opened it in front of me, but something inside me refused to leave it behind. I wasn't supposed to know what was in it, but I couldn't help it. Days after the delivery, alone in my apartment, with my name already gone from the system, I did what no courier was ever meant to do. I opened it. There was no message, no letter, just a photograph, black and white, surveillance style, grainy, but clear enough to recognize the faces. 5 men, all seated at a metal table in a dimly lit room. 2 of them I recognized from internal security. One was my colleague from logistics, the one who had vanished days earlier, and the 5th was me. Scrawled across the bottom of the photo in red ink were 3 words: evaluation, unreliable, proceed. That night, I couldn't breathe. I knew what it meant. This wasn't a letter to be delivered. It was a directive to eliminate, a tool to test whether I would comply. My delivery had marked the beginning of a purge, and I was either complicit in it or included in it. I chose neither. The first step was to disappear from the system without raising alarms. I faked illness, reported stomach cramps, requested 3 days of rest through the internal health officer who barely looked at me as he approved it. The second step was travel. There's a small freight line that runs through northern Ryanggang province, near the border with China. Not many know about it, and fewer use it. It was originally intended to move coal, but sometimes, low-level technicians hitch rides to nearby factories. I bribed a dockhand to let me on board. The train was freezing, dark, and slower than death itself. I sat between crates marked machinery, clutching my coat shut as snow seeped through the cracks in the wall. Each bump in the track felt like a heartbeat. I got off near Hesan, a city close to the Yalu River. From there, the plan was simple: cross the river, find the smuggler I'd heard about from a former delivery contact, a man who once whispered to me that freedom costs less than loyalty. I found him 2 nights later in a noodle shop that didn't sell noodles. He looked me up and down and said only this: "You'll freeze before you're free. But if you're serious, we move at dawn." The crossing was a nightmare. We left before sunrise. The forest was silent, but my footsteps sounded like thunder in my ears. We moved downhill, past collapsed fences and power lines that hadn't worked in years. My guide moved like he was born in the shadows. We reached the river just before dawn. It was mostly frozen, but not fully. We would have to step through knee-deep water, climb broken ice, and pray it didn't crack beneath us. Halfway through, the ice shifted. I froze. My guide whispered, "Move, or die." I moved. When we reached the far bank, my boots were soaked and my legs numb. But I was in China, barely. That night, we found shelter in an abandoned shed outside a farming village. My guide contacted someone, his cousin, a woman who ran a small underground church network, helping defectors reach safety. 2 days later, I was picked up by a van with tinted windows. Inside was a Korean woman in her 50s. She held my hand as I climbed in. No words were exchanged, but her warmth told me I was no longer alone. In the safe house, I stayed hidden for weeks. They gave me food, warm clothes, a blanket. The woman brought a doctor to treat my frostbitten feet. At night, she read from a book I didn't understand, but her voice calmed me. One evening, I showed her the envelope. Her face changed. Not fear, but understanding. She took the photo from inside, looked at it, then looked at me. "You were not meant to live," she said softly. I nodded. "I know." Eventually, they connected me with a human rights organization based in Seoul. They arranged transport through a third country, falsified documents, and coordinated my entry through official refugee channels. It took months. During that time, I was moved twice, once after a tip that Chinese police were searching the area, but I made it. When the plane touched down in Incheon, I cried for the first time in years, not because I was free, but because I knew the cost of that freedom, and I still carried its weight in my coat. The first thing that overwhelmed me in South Korea was not the language. It was the light. In Pyongyang, even in the best districts, electricity was rationed. Most nights were spent in the dark. But here, the airport was bright enough to blind me. Neon advertisements flickered from every wall. Digital boards changed constantly. Phones buzzed and chimed. I felt like I had walked into a city designed by gods. They gave me a welcome kit at immigration, a small pouch with toiletries, a phone with no SIM card, a change of clothes, and a bus ticket to a place called Hanawon. Hanawon was a government-run resettlement center for defectors. It looked like a school, but the people inside wore expressions that felt all too familiar: caution, confusion, exhaustion. We had classes each day, not in politics, not in ideology, but in how to use a microwave, how to open a bank account, how to navigate the subway, how to answer a job interview, even how to smile for photographs. I had never learned these things. One afternoon, a teacher showed us how to use Google. When I typed North Korea, I expected propaganda. What I saw instead were satellite images of prison camps, news reports about public executions, interviews with survivors, truths I had never been allowed to believe. That night, I vomited in my dorm room, not from the food, from shame. How many envelopes had I delivered? How many names? How many people disappeared after my steps? I hadn't killed anyone, but I had helped the machine run, smoothly, efficiently, silently. And now I was here, using a touchscreen phone to read articles calling my former superiors criminals. It felt like standing on another planet. Some days, I tried to forget. I walked the streets of Seoul in anonymity, overwhelmed by the noise, the faces, the freedom. But the freedom frightened me. No one cared where I went. No one followed me. No one checked my papers. For weeks, I would instinctively pause at intersections, waiting for invisible commands. At night, I slept with the light on. Old habits. There were beautiful moments too. The first time I tasted real coffee. The first time I saw children laughing freely in a park. The first time a stranger smiled at me for no reason at all. It made me want to cry, but I couldn't. Not yet. Before I left Hanawon, we were each given the chance to choose a new name, a fresh start. I kept my old one, because no matter where I went, I knew one thing. I was not starting over. I was continuing a life that had been stolen and returned. I don't speak much about my past, not because I'm ashamed of where I came from, but because I still don't fully understand who I was. Sometimes, when people here ask me what I did in North Korea, I just say, I worked in delivery. They smile, thinking I mean food or logistics. I let them believe that. Because how do you explain that you used to carry messages that weren't meant to be read, only obeyed? How do you say, I never held a gun, but people disappeared after I knocked on their door? I thought I was neutral. I thought I was invisible. But I was part of the weapon. I was just the courier. But the message carried death. Even now, when I walk past mailboxes or watch a postman drop off a letter, I feel my throat tighten. I wonder, what if they knew what I once delivered? Would they still hold my gaze so kindly? In Seoul, I live alone. Again. But this time, the silence is mine to keep or to break. I take long walks at night. I stand at busy intersections and watch strangers laugh under streetlights. I read the news without fear. I watch movies that once would have been banned. I sit in cafes, letting the sound of espresso machines drown out the echoes of orders I once followed without question. Sometimes I dream of the photograph. 5 men at a metal table. One of them me. I wonder what became of the others. I wonder if they survived. I wonder if any of them managed to escape like I did. I wonder if they ever opened their envelope. Maybe we were all couriers. Maybe we were all the message. I didn't come here to become someone else. I came here because I couldn't stay who I was. Now, I'm still learning how to live without permission, to speak without rehearsing, to exist without fear. Freedom isn't loud, like the slogans used to say. It's quiet. It's standing in the sunlight without someone watching you. It's choosing to keep walking, even when you don't know where the road leads.